Dr. Mark Ramos pressed the diagnostic scanner against the blue-skinned child's chest, watching the vital signs plummet on his medical display. The Iridian girl-daughter of a ship captain and a species humanity had known for barely a year was dying from radiation poisoning that her people couldn't treat. As her forefingered hand clutched weakly at his sleeve, Mark knew he faced an impossible choice: follow regulations and watch her die, or attempt a dangerous cross-species treatment that could save her life and forge an unbreakable bond with the Iridians. Alarms blared throughout Frontier Outpost Gamma 9 as Mark rushed through the sterile corridors of the medical bay. Just 3 hours earlier, the damaged Iridian vessel had crashed near the outpost after a brutal attack by space pirates. The wounded aliens, with their characteristic iridescent blue skin, had been brought in with various injuries, but 6-year-old Kyle's condition was by far the most critical. Her internal organs are deteriorating rapidly, Mark explained to Trevix, the Iridian medical officer who stood rigid with concern beside the biobed. The radiation from the pirates' weapons is causing cellular breakdown that's fatal to your physiology. Trevix's face darkened to a deeper blue. We have no treatment for this specific radiation poisoning. She has less than 6 hours remaining. Mark ran a hand through his graying hair, mind racing through possibilities. At Fortitude, he'd spent the last decade specializing in xenomedicine, but the Iridians were still largely unknown territory. Their diplomatic relations with humanity were barely 12 months old. Humans produce an enzyme naturally that neutralizes this type of radiation damage, Mark said, fingers flying across his data tablet. I could potentially synthesize it and adapt our treatment protocol for Iridian physiology. You would attempt this? Trevix asked, his multifaceted eyes widening. It's never been done between our species. The risk is significant. If I miscalculate, it could accelerate her death. Mark didn't sugarcoat the reality. And Earth's Interspecies Medical Ethics Committee explicitly prohibits experimental treatments on alien subjects without approval. A process that would take weeks, Trevix concluded grimly. The doors to the medical bay hissed open as Colonel Harrington, the outpost commander, entered with a delegation of senior Iridian officials. Their ornate attire and formal posture immediately identified them as high-ranking dipdoctorates. Dr. Ramos, Harrington said, her voice tight with tension. These officials are demanding to know why Ambassador Zoe's daughter is being treated by a human doctor rather than being transferred to their homeworld. Mark straightened his back, acutely aware of the weight settling on his shoulders. The child on the biobed wasn't just any patient, she was the daughter of the Iridian ambassador to Earth. He'd met Captain Zoe briefly when the wounded were brought in. She was currently in surgery for her own injuries. Colonel, Mark said quietly, transferring Kyle would kill her. She won't survive the journey. The tallest Iridian stepped forward. You understand, human, that in our culture, children are sacred. Those who save our young earn a blood debt that can never be repaid. And those who fail them, Mark asked, though he suspected the answer. Become enemies for generations, the Iridian replied. Colonel Harrington pulled Mark aside, speaking in hushed tones. Mark, I don't need to tell you what's at stake here. The Iridians have technology we've been trying to access for months. This single case could strengthen or destroy everything we've built. Mark looked back at the child. Kyle's breathing had grown more labored in just the few minutes they'd been talking. Her iridescent skin had dulled to a pale blue-gray. I'm going to treat her, Mark decided, already moving toward the medical fabricator to begin synthesizing the enzyme. That's against protocol, Harrington warned. Your medical license will be worthless if I stand by and do nothing, Mark finished for her. Sometimes we have to risk everything to do what's right. As he programmed the synthesizer, Mark felt the eyes of every Iridian in the room fixed upon him. Their entire species would soon either consider humanity their greatest allies or their most hated enemies. It all depended on whether he could save one little blue-skinned girl. Mark's fingers danced across the holographic interface of the medical synthesizer. His eyes darted between the biochemical readouts and Kyrill's vital signs displayed on the overhead monitor. The Iridian child's life signs continued their steady decliniach beep of the monitor, coming slightly slower than the last. "Initiating enzyme sequence," Mark announced, his voice firm despite the tension knotting his shoulders. He extracted a vial of his own blood and placed it into the analyzer. "Let's identify the exact protein chains we need." The lab doors hissed open behind him. Mark didn't turn, keeping his attention fixed on the synthesizer as it began breaking down the human blood sample. MEDICA, cross-reference human radiation neutralization enzymes with Iridian blood chemistry, he instructed the outpost's AI system. "Cross-referencing," the AI's calm voice responded. "Running compatibility simulations now." "You're actually going through with this," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Mark glanced up to see Lieutenant Commander Wei Gray, the outpost's chief science officer, watching him from the entrance. Gray's normally immaculate uniform was rumpled, and he carried a sealed container marked with Research Division insignia. "Not now, Wei. I need to focus." Gray stepped fully into the lab, setting the container on a nearby counter. "I'm not here to stop you." He unsealed the container, revealing specialized medical equipment. "Thought you might need these. Enzyme stabilizers and cellular repair nanites from the restricted research bay." Mark's eyes widened. "Those are prototype field equipment." "How did you? Let's just say certain security protocols were temporarily overlooked." Gray began unpacking the equipment. "My daughter would have died from IO fever if a doctor hadn't taken a similar risk with an experimental treatment. I won't stand by while you lose your career for doing what's right." A series of charts appeared on the main display as MEDICA completed its analysis. "Initial results promising," the AI stated. "Iridian cellular structure shows 82% compatibility with modified human radiation-neutralizing enzymes. Warning: significant calibration required for safe application." Mark studied the molecular diagrams, noting the similarities and differences between human and Iridian cellular structures. "They don't produce this enzyme naturally, but their cells have receptors that should accept it if properly modified." "Simulation complete," MEDICA announced. "Recommended treatment synthesis protocol now available." Mark immediately transferred the protocol to the synthesizer. The machine hummed to life, mixing compounds and replicating the modified enzymes. "Estimated time to completion?" he asked. 37 minutes, MEDICA replied. "That's too long," Mark said, checking Kyrill's monitors. Her oxygen saturation had dropped another 2% in just the last minute. She might not have 30 minutes. Gray moved to another workstation. "What if we use the nanites to accelerate delivery, program them to carry the enzymes directly to the affected tissues?" "That's completely unauthorized for cross-species application," Mark said, even as he began considering the possibility. "But it might be our only option." His comm unit beeped. Colonel Harrington's voice came through Doctor, and clipped. "Dr. Ramos, I've got Senior Ambassador Drell demanding to see his niece. He's brought a medical transport team." "You have less than 2 hours before they take matters into their own hands." "Understood," Mark replied, then turned to Gray. "Help me reprogram these nanites for Iridian physiology." They worked in focused silence, Mark adjusting enzyme formulations while Gray modified the nanite programming. The lab doors opened again, and Mark looked up, expecting to see Colonel Harrington or perhaps the Iridian officials. Instead, Ambassador Zoe stood in the doorway. Her normally vibrant blue skin had dulled with stress and injury. Bandages wrapped her torso where she'd been wounded in the crash, and she moved with obvious pain. Despite this, her eyes fixed immediately on her daughter. Mark tensed, prepared to defend his unauthorized procedure. Zoe said nothing, simply crossing to Kyle's bedside and placing a forefingered hand gently on her daughter's forehead. Her eyes tracked the declining vital signs on the monitor, then turned to Mark's work. "Ambassador, you shouldn't be here," Mark said. "You need rest after your surgery." Zoe's multifaceted eyes studied him intently. "Continue your work, doctor. I will not interfere." The synthesizer chimed as the first batch of enzymes completed processing. Mark carefully extracted the vial of clear, faintly luminescent fluid. "It's ready, but standard intravenous delivery would be too slow given her condition," he explained, more to Gray than to Zoe. "We need to use the nanites." Gray finished his programming and presented a small injection device. "Nanite control systems ready. They'll deliver the enzymes directly to the affected tissues and provide real-time feedback on cellular response." Mark loaded the enzymes into the nanite suspension. "This goes against every regulation in the book," he muttered. "Then we'll write a new book after it works," Gray replied. The lab doors opened with a forceful hiss. Captain Brace Harlow strode in, flanked by 2 security officers. His expression was granite, teeth clenched firmly beneath his secropped silver hair. "Dr. Ramos, I have direct orders to terminate this unauthorized procedure," Harlow announced. "The committee has explicitly denied permission for experimental cross-species treatment." Mark positioned himself between Harlow and Kyle's biobed. "She'll die without treatment, Captain." "That's not for you to decide," Harlow countered, stepping forward. "Stand down." Before Mark could respond, Trevix moved between them. The Iridian medical officer presented a document on a data tablet. "Captain Harlow, I present a formal life debt declaration, signed by Ambassador Zoe and recognized under Article 7 of the Earth-Iridian Accords," Trevix stat doctor. "This document legally requests Dr. Ramos's intervention and acknowledges full responsibility for any consequences." Harlow scanned the document, his expression darkening. "This is a technicality." "A legal technicality, Trevix emphasized. "One that protects Dr. Ramos under both human and Iridian law." Harlow's jaw worked as he considered his options. Finally, he handed the tablet back to Trevix. "This will be noted in my report. Proceed at your own risk, doctor." As Harlow departed, Mark turned back to Kyle. Her breathing had grown even more labored during the interruption. "We need to move now," he said, preparing the injection site on Kyle's arm. The blue skin seemed nearly translucent under the harsh medical lights. With steady hands that belied his anxiety, Mark injected the nanoteenzyme mixture into Kyle's bloodstream. The monitors immediately registered the introduction of the foreign material, alarms briefly sounding before Gray silenced them. "MEDICA, full spectrum monitoring of nanite distribution and enzyme delivery," Mark ordered. "Track cellular response in real time." "Monitoring engaged," the AI confirmed. "Nanites deploying to affected tissues." For several minutes, they watched in silence as the treatment spread through Kyle's body. The monitors showed the nanites moving efficiently, delivering enzymes to radiation-damaged cells. Initially, her vital signs remained unchanged. Then, without warning, all of Kyle's monitors plunged into critical territory. Alarms blared throughout the medical bay. "She's crashing," Gray said, moving to assist. "Enzyme concentration might be too low." Mark made a split-second assessment of the data. "The damage is more extensive than our scans indicated. We need to increase the dosage." He quickly prepared a second injection with a higher enzyme concentration. "This exceeds my calculated safe limits, but I think Iridian physiology can handle it better than I estimated." Zoe watched, silent tears tracking down her blue cheeks as Mark administered the second injection. For 17 minutes, Mark counted each one on the chronometer. Kyle's life hung in perfect balance. The medical bay fell silent except for the persistent beeping of the monitors. No one spoke. No one moved. Mark found himself holding his breath as the nanites distributed the higher concentration of enzymes throughout Kyle's small body. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, her oxygen levels began to rise. Her heart rate stabilized. The cellular degeneration indicators slowed, then stopped. MEDICA confirmed cellular scan, Mark requested, hardly believing the readings. Radiation damage progression halted in all major organs, the AI confirmed, detecting initial cellular regeneration in peripheral tissues. Mark exhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment of cautious relief. He turned to Gray, who offered a tired smile in return. The nanites will complete their programmed cycle in approximately 12 hours, Mark explained to Zoe and Trevix. We're not out of danger yet, if her body rejects the treatment after they deactivate. Trevix nodded in understanding. The next 12 hours will determine everything. The lab doors opened again, this time admitting a man in an admiral's uniform that Mark recognized immediately: Admiral Xavier Thornton, Earth's senior dip doctor, Attic representative to the Iridian Confederation. Doctor Ramos, Thornton said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I need a full briefing on this procedure. The Iridian High Council is monitoring the situation closely. Mark prepared himself for a reprimand, but Thornton's next words surprised him. They're particularly interested in the implications for treating radiation poisoning among their deuterium miners. Thousands suffer from similar exposure annually. I'll prepare a complete report, Mark promised. But right now we need to continue monitoring Chiral. The next 12 hours are critical. Thornton nodded, then glanced at Trevix with obvious curiosity. In our culture, Trevix explained, saving a child Kriya doctor, a bond more sacred than blood relation. If Chiral survives, Doctor Ramos will become her Verdather life guardian. It is our highest honor. As if summoned by her name, Chiral's eyes fluttered open. Her usually bright purple irises were dulled by illness, but unmistakably alert. She looked directly at Mark and whispered a single word in the Iridian language before drifting back to sleep. Zoe's face transformed with emotion. She called you guardian, she translated, her voice breaking. She knows what you've done for her. Mark checked the monitors, confirming that Chiral had simply fallen into normal sleep, the first natural rest she'd had since arriving at the outpost. The initial phase of the treatment had succeeded, but the true test still lay ahead when the nanites completed their cycle. He settled into the chair beside her bed, prepared for the long vigil ahead. Now we wait, he said quietly, watching the steady rise and fall of the child's chest. Mark monitored Chiral's vital signs for the 12th consecutive hour, rubbing his eyes as the chronometer ticked past the critical threshold. The nanites had begun their programmed deactivation sequence, the final phase of the treatment that would determine everything. MEDICA, comprehensive scan of all major organ systems, he ordered, preparing himself for any signs of rejection or cellular degradation. The AI processed the request, displaying a three-dimensional rendering of Chiral's internal systems on the main screen. Scan complete. All nanites deactivating according to protocol parameters. No adverse reactions detected. Mark leaned forward, scrutinizing the data flowing across the screen. What he saw made him blink in disbelief. MEDICA confirmed cellular regeneration rates in the pulmonary and hepatic systems. Regeneration proceeding at 327% of projected rates. Cellular integrity restored to 89% of baseline in pulmonary tissue. Hepatic function returning to normal parameters. Mark turned to Gray, who had returned after a brief rest period. Look at this. Her cells aren't just accepting the treatment, they're utilizing it more efficiently than I calculated. Gray studied the readouts, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The radiation damage is reversing far faster than your models predicted. Physiological compatibility between the modified enzymes and Iridian cellular structures exceeds all projections, MEDICA added. Recommend documentation of unexpected synergistic effects for future research protocols. Mark initiated a recording sequence, capturing every detail of Kyle's response to the treatment. As he documented the cellular regeneration patterns, the lab doors opened. Trevix entered, followed by Ambassador Zoe. "Doctor," Trevix said, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "how is she?" Mark gestured to the displays. "Better than we could have hoped. The nanites are deactivating on schedule, but her body is continuing the healing process independently. Her vital signs have stabilized completely." Zoe rushed to her daughter's bedside. Kyle's color had improved dramatically, the dull gray pallor replaced by a healthier blue tone. Her breathing was deep and regular. As if sensing her mother's presence, Kyle's eyes fluttered open clear and bright purple once again. She spoke softly in Iridian, reaching for her mother's hand. "She's asking if you are well," Trevix translated for Mark. "She remembers you were injured too." Zoe replied gently in their language, stroking her daughter's face. Trevix turned to Mark. "She is telling Kyle that you are her guardian now, that you fought against your own people's rules to save her life." Mark approached the bedside. "How do you feel, Kyle?" The child studied him with intelligent eyes. "Better," she replied in careful English. "You fixed the burning inside me." "Yes," Mark said. "The radiation was damaging your cells, but we found a way to help your body repair them." "Thank you, Guardian," she said, using the Iridian term translated into English. Within 48 hours, news of the successful cross-species treatment had spread throughout Outpost Gamma 9 and beyond. Mark's lab filled with data requests from medical researchers across human space, while Trevix managed similar inquiries from Iridian medical authorities. Mark stood in Colonel Harrington's office, facing a communication screen displaying 3 senior medical administrators from IRT Doctor and Trau Command. "The treatment documentation is comprehensive," said Dr. Chen, head of xenomedicine at Earth Central. "This represents the first successful adaptation of human radiation treatment for Iridian P. Doctor, biology. We're particularly interested in the nanite delivery system," added Dr. Rodriguez. "The reprogramming to accommodate Iridian cellular structures was ingenious if completely unauthorized." Harrington cleared his throat. About that authorization, the third administrator raised her hand. "Colon Doctor, we understand the C. Doctor instances. A committee of specialists is reviewing the case now." "Doctor Ramos, you should know that Dr. Levi Goldstein, chairman of the Interspecies Medical Ethics Committee, will be arriving at your outpost within 5 days." Mark straightened. Goldstein was the foremost authority on cross-species medical ethics and notorious for his strict adherence to protocol. "I stand by my decisions," Mark said. "I'll accept whatever consequences come with them." Colonel Harrington's comm unit chimed. "Colonel, the Iridian diplomatic vessel is requesting docking clearance," came the voice of the station's operations officer. "Grant it immediately," Harrington replied. "Prepare the main reception bay." After the communication with Earth ended, Harrington turned to Mark. "Whatever happens with your review, Doctor, I want you to know that He paused, struggling with the words. "I would have made the same choice." 7 days after the treatment, Mark entered the medical bay to find Kyle sitting up, engaging in animated conversation with Gray. Her recovery had accelerated beyond any medical projections. "Guardian," she called when she saw him. The name had stuck, despite Mark's gentle corrections. "I was explaining to Kyle how the nanites worked," Gray said. "She grasps the concepts remarkably well. The tiny machines carried the healing enzymes exactly where they needed to go," Kyle explained proudly, "like targeted delivery ships." Mark checked her latest scans. "Your body has already regenerated over 95% of the damaged tissue. If these readings continue to improve, you can leave the medical bay tomorrow." "Can I still come see you?" Kyle asked. "Of course," Mark answered. "We need to monitor your progress." A station-wide announcement interrupted them. "All senior staff report to the main reception bay. The Iridian flagship Eternal Dawn has docked. High Counselor Vetrix arriving in 15 minutes. Gray's eyebrows rose. Vetrix, the head of the Iridian Confederation, here. This is unprecedented, Trevix said, entering the lab. High Counselor Vetrix has never visited a human installation. Mark felt a sudden weight of responsibility. Why would the Iridian head of state come here? Trevix's expression became solemn. For you, Doctor. The Life Guardian ceremony must be performed by the highest authority available. The reception bay transformed into a ceremonial space with efficiency that suggested extensive preparation. Mark stood at the center, dressed in his formal medical uniform, surrounded by the outpost's senior staff and a growing contingent of Iridian officials. High Counselor Vetrix cut an imposing figure taller than most Iridians, with deep blue skin marked with intricate patterns that signified his lineage and rank. His entourage included 12 senior officials in formal regalia. Admiral Thornton, who had arrived just hours before Vetrix, represented Earth's diplomatic corps. He stood beside Colonel Harrington as the Iridian procession approached. Kyle, now strong enough to walk short distances, entered with her mother. She wore a formal Iridian robe embroidered with symbols Mark didn't recognize. The ceremony began with Vetrix addressing the assembled humans and Iridians in his native language, which Trevix translated. He spoke of the sacred trust between healer and patient, the bonds tha-doctor, ransom species, and the courage required to challenge established rules when lives hang in the balance. Dr. Mark Ramos, Vetrix said, switching to perfect English, you risked your position, your career, and potentially your freedom to save a child not of your species. Such action embodies the highest virtues recognized by the Iridian people. Vetrix presented a bracelet crafted from lustrous, silver-white metal inlaid with crystal fragments that captured and reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. This contains quantum-linked crystals connected to Kyle's family lineage, Vetrix explained. By accepting this, you become guardian forever connected to her family through bonds stronger than genetics. As Mark accepted the bracelet, he noticed cameras recording the ceremony. Trevix leaned close. This is being broadcast throughout Iridian territories and to Earth. Billions are watching. The bracelet felt warm against Mark's skin as Vetrix completed the ritual words. Kyle approached, taking Mark's hand in her forefingered grip. Guardian, she said formally, then added something in Iridian that brought tears to her mother's eyes. She has pledged to honor your wisdom and courage throughout her life, Trevix translated quietly. The ceremony concluded with Vetrix addressing Admiral Thornton directly. Admiral, I request a private discussion with you and Colonel Ha-Doctor, and Jitan immediately following this ceremony. There are matters of galactic importance to discuss. Later that evening, Dr. Levi Goldstein arrived at the outpost with a team of specialists. Mark expected a formal reprimand, possibly even the end of his career. Instead, he found Goldstein in the medical lab, meticulously reviewing the treatment data. Fascinating adaptation of the enzyme delivery system, Goldstein commented without looking up. Your modifications to the nanite programming were particularly innovative. Sir, about the protocol violations, Goldstein waved a hand dismissively. The committee has reviewed your case and reached a decision. You'll receive a minor reprimand for the protocol breach, but your treatment has been retroactively sanctioned. He finally looked up at Mark. Sometimes medicine advances through careful research, sometimes through desperate innovation. This appears to be a case of the latter. Thank you, sir, Mark said, surprised by the leniency. Don't thank me yet, Goldstein replied. The committee has another matter to discuss. Commander Gray's involvement in your unauthorized procedure has led to an unexpected opportunity. Gray entered the lab, looking equally confused. Commander, Goldstein continued, the committee is establishing a joint human-Iridian medical research initiative focused on cross-species applications of nanite technology. High Counselor Vetrix has already pledged Iridian support. We need someone to head this initiative Asomion with demonstrated willingness to think beyond conventional boundaries. Gray's expression transformed from confusion to astonishment. You want me to lead it? Assuming you're interested in the position, Goldstein confirmed. As Gray processed this unexpected development, Mark's attention returned to Kyle, who had taken to following him throughout his daily routine. She sat nearby, watching the proceedings with keen interest. "Why do humans use verbal commands for your medical systems?" she asked during a lull in the conversation. "Iridian medical interfaces respond to thought patterns." "Our technology doesn't quite work that way yet," Mark explained, realizing how much he still had to lead Doctor about Iridian medical advances. His comm unit signaled urgently. Colonel Harrington's voice came through, tight with tension. "Dr. Ramos, report to the command center immediately. We've received emergency transmissions from Proxima Centauri colony. There's been a radiation containment failure at their power facility." Mark exchanged glances with Gray, instantly understanding the implications. "How many affected?" he asked. "Over 200 colonists," Harrington replied. "Conventional treatments are failing due to the massive exposure levels. They're requesting any assistance we can provide." As Mark rushed toward the command center, his mind already calculating enzyme requirements and nanite programming modifications, he heard footsteps behind him. Trevix caught up, his expression grave. "I heard the alert," the Iridian medical officer said. "This radiation poisoning gets similar to Kyle's." "Likely identical," Mark confirmed. "But treating 200 people requires resources we don't have here." Trevix nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you don't, but we do. The Eternal Dawn carries medical facilities that could synthesize the enzymes in the quantities you need." Mark stopped abruptly. "You have that capability aboard your ship?" "Yes," Trevix said. "But these facilities have never been shown to non-Iridians. They incorporate pro-Doctor, Eteri technology we've carefully protected." Before Mark could respond, Ambassador Zoe approached, having overheard their conversation. "Dr. Ramos," she said formally, "I offer the full medical resources of the Eternal Dawn to save your people. As my daughter's life guardian, you have earned this trust." Mark looked between them, the magnitude of the offer sinking in. "We need to move quickly. Every hour means more lives lost." Trevix nodded. "I will inform High Counselor Vetrix immediately. Prepare your team." As they hurried toward the diplomatic quarters, Mark realized that the crisis had become more than a medical emergency. It had become a test of the fragile trust forming between their species. The combined human-Iridian medical team boarded the Eternal Dawn within the hour. Mark supervised the loading of his medical equipment while Ambassador Zoe coordinated with the ship's medical staff. Kyle watched from behind her mother, eyes wide with curiosity. "Will I be allowed to help?" she asked Mark. Ambassador Zoe answered before Mark could respond. "You will remain in our quarters during the mission, Kyle." "But Mother, this is not a debate," Zoe said firmly. "These humans are suffering from the same condition that nearly took you from me. I will not risk exposing you again." Mark knelt beside Kyle. "Your mother is right. The best way you can help is by staying safe." Kyle's expression shifted through disappointment to reluctant acceptance. "Will you tell me about it when you return?" "Every detail," Mark promised. The journey to Proxima Centauri took 18 hours at maximum speed. Mark used the time to work with Trevix, adapting their treatment protocol for mass production. The Eternal Dawn's medical bay was unlike anything Mark had seen. Sleek biological interfaces merged with technology in ways that made Earth's most advanced medical equipment seem primitive by comparison. "These enzyme synthesizers can produce 10 TDRS what your facilities at Gamma 9 could manage," Trevix explained, manipulating a control surface with precise movements of his forefingered hands. "Doctor." Goldstein studied the equipment with unconcealed fascination. The integration of biological components with the mechanical systems is remarkable. Our philosophy differs from humans, Trevix said. We view technology as an extension of biology, not separate from it. Their work continued through the night cycle. When they emerged from hyperspace, Centauri, the team had prepared enough enzyme treatment for the first 100 patients. Admiral Thornton's face appeared on the communication screen. Dr. Ramos, we've informed the colony of your arrival. Colonel Steele is expecting you. Has he been briefed on our treatment protocol? Mark asked. Thornton's expression tightened. Yes, though he's expressed concerns about allowing Iridian personnel access to colonial medical facilities. Concerns? Mark frowned. People are dying. Colonel Steele has a complicated history with the Iridians. He lost his family during the Proxima Centauri conflict. Approach with sensitivity. Mark exchanged glances with Trevix. This complication hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. When they landed, the human portion of the team disembarked first. Mark stepped onto the colony's landing pad, immediately struck by the acrid smell of burnt electronics and medical antiseptic. The radiation containment failure had affected the colony's central power core, located beneath the main H-Doctor, Tation Dome. Colonel Marcus Steele met them at the airlock. He stood standing tall in his colonial defense uniform, eyes flat and unreadable beneath silver-gray hair. Dr. Ramos, he acknowledged with a curt nod. Your equipment is cleared for transfer to our secondary medical facility. Colonel, we appreciate your quick response, Mark said. We have Iridian medical personnel with specialized equipment. That Steele cut him off. Human medical staff only. Colonial security protocols prohibit alien access to critical infrastructure. Mark fought to keep his expression neutral. Colonel, with respect, the Iridian contribution is essential to our treatment protocol. The enzymes were developed using their technology. Then they can provide the enzymes which will administer, Steele said flatly. My orders stand. Mark showed him a data tablet. This is Chiral, a Iridian child who survived near-lethal radiation poisoning because of this treatment. The nanite delivery system requires specialized monitoring that only their medical staff can provide. Steele glanced at the images without emotion. My people are capable of following instructions, Doctor. Security precautions remain in place. Through the viewport, Mark could see emergency medical personnel rushing between treatment areas. The makeshift triage center had expanded beyond the designated medical zone into an adjacent recreation area. Patients lay on improvised beds, many showing advanced radiation symptoms, same mottled skin and thinning membranes Chiral had exhibited. How many casualties so far? Mark asked. 4 to 7 dead. Another 200 critical, Steele replied mechanically. 12 more since your departure from Gamma 9. Mark felt a surge of frustrated anger. Colonel, those people will continue dying, Doctor. We argue about protocols. Then I suggest you begin working with what you've been allowed, Steele said, turning Doctor. Leave. Your equipment will be transferred immediately. Dr. Chen will show you to the Auxiliary Medic Doctor Center. A harried-looking woman in a medical coat approached as Steele departed. Dr. Ramos. I'm Helen Chen, Chief Medical Officer. Thank you for coming. We're desperate. Mark lowered his voice. Dr. Chen, this treatment requires Iridian medical staff. The Colonel's restrictions will cost lives. I know, she whispered, but after what happened to his family. He watched his wife and daughter die in the crossfire when Iridian mercenaries attacked a research outpost. His son Jake is all he has left. As they walked toward the medical center, Mark contacted Admiral Thornton on a secure channel, explaining the situation. 30 minutes later, while Mark's team was setting up their equipment in the auxiliary facility, Thornton called back. I've invoked Emergency Medical Protocol 734B, the Admiral said. It temporarily supersedes Colonel Steele's authority on medical matters. Your Iridian colleagues are cleared to disembark. but only to the auxiliary facility. Even with this authorization, Steele stationed security personnel at every entrance to the auxiliary medical center. The Iridian equipment was delayed for inspection multiple times before finally reaching the treatment area. Mark and Trevix wasted no time once everything was in place. They began treating the first 30 patients, many of whom had been evacuated from the deepest levels of the facility where radiation exposure had been most intense. The results were encouraging. Within hours, the first patients showed signs of cellular regeneration. Dr. Chen monitored the progress with increasing amazement. "This is remarkable," she said, studying a patient's readings. "Tissue regeneration at twice the rate of our best treatments." Mark allowed himself a moment of relief, but it didn't last. By the 18th hour, they encountered an unexpected problem. Patients from the lowest levels of the facility weren't responding as expected. Trevix analyzed samples from the non-responsive patients. "Their cellular structure shows mutation patterns, Doctor, rent from what we observed in Cairo. The standard enzyme formulation isn't binding properly. We need to modify the treatment," Mark said, "and for that, we need access to the colony's genetic sequencing equipment." Dr. Chen shook her head. "That's in the main medical center. Steele won't grant access." Mark tried reasoning with Steele directly, presenting data from the successful treatments alongside projections of casualties without intervention. The colonel remained unmoved, his eyes cold as he reviewed the information. "My decision stands," Steele said. "Use what you have here." Returning to the auxiliary facility, Mark found the team working around the clock. Trevix had improvised with the equipment available, but progress was painful. Dr. Low. The death toll had reached 53. Late that night, as Mark reviewed patient data, he heard the auxiliary door slide open. A teenage boy in a medical assistant's uniform entered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Dr. Ramos," the boy approached. "I'm Jake Steele. I need to talk to you about my father." Mark studied the boy, perhaps 13, with his father's straight posture but softer features. His eyes held a determined intensity at odds with his youth. "My father isn't thinking clearly," Jake said quietly. "He's sick too. He was in the control room when the containment failed, but he's refused treatment." Jake pulled out a data chip and inserted it into Mark's tablet. Patient files appeared. Colonel Steele's medical records, showing elevated radiation levels and early neurological symptoms. "I work as an aide in the medical center," Jake explained. "I've been monitoring his condition. He doesn't know." Mark scrolled through the data. "He needs treatment, Jake." "I know," the boy said, "and I can help you get what you need. I have access codes to the genetic sequencing lab. The night shift has minimal security. I can let you in." Mark looked at the boy, weighing the risks against the mounting deaths. "Your father wouldn't approve." Jake's expression hardened. "My father taught me that duty comes first. Right now, his duty is to these colonists, even if he can't see it." 3 hours later, Mark, Trevix, and a small team slipped into the main medical center using Jake's access codes. The genetic sequencing lab was state-of-the-art, with equipment that would cut their modification time by 2/3. They worked through the night, Jake assisting with remarkable competence for his age. By dawn, they had synthesized a modified enzyme formulation tailored to the specific mutation patterns seen in the deep-level exposure victims. The lab door slid open as they finalized the production sequence. Colonel Steele stood in the doorway, flanked by security officers, his face livid. "This is a direct violation of my orders," he snapped, eyes locking on his son. "Jake, what are you doing here?" "Saving lives, Dad," Jake said, standing his ground. "Including yours." Steele advanced into the room. "You have no authorization to." His words cut off abruptly as his body went rigid. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor, limbs jerking in violent seizures. "Dad!" Jake rushed to his father's side. Mark and Trevix moved instantly, medical training overriding all other concerns. Together they stabilized Steele, administering a dose of their newest enzyme formulation directly into his carotid artery. The seizure gradually subsided. Steele lay unconscious but stable as Mark monitored his vital signs. The radiation sickness progressed faster than his records indicated, Mark said to Jake. He was hiding his symptoms. The security team, witnessing the colonel's collapse and the medical team's immediate response, stood down. One of them, a lieutenant, stepped forward. "What do you need, doctor?" she asked quietly. "Full access to all medical facilities," Mark replied without hesitation. "And contact Admiral Thornton. Tell him we need the Eternal Dawn in orbit for full-scale enzyme production." The lieutenant nodded and began issuing orders. The tide had turned. The lieutenant issued the orders while Mark and Jake carefully moved Colonel Steele onto a stretcher. Within minutes, medical technicians arrived to transfer him to the main treatment facility. "He'll stabilize," Mark assured Jake, who walked alongside his father's stretcher. "The modified enzymes are already counteracting the neurological effects." 4 weeks later, Mark stood on the observation deck of the Earth diplomatic vessel Stellar Horizon, watching as the massive structure of Arcturus Station grew larger in the viewscreen. The metallic snowflake-like construction rotated slowly, its 7 distinct wings extending outward from the central hubeach, representing one of the galactic conquered member species. "Quite the sight, isn't it?" Admiral Thornton stepped beside him. "Humanity's potential future." Mark nodded. "I never imagined our work at Proxima would lead to this." The success of the joint human-Iridian medical intervention created quite the stir among the conquered representatives, Thornton said. "It demonstrated exactly the kind of cross-species cooperation they value. We just did what was necessary, doctor, to save lives, which is precisely why you're here." Thornton handed him a data tablet. "Our delegation needs your first-hand account of the Proxima incident. The formal hearings begin tomorrow." Mark scrolled through the agenda. "I see Dr. Henrik Voss is already here." "Yes. He arrived 3 days ago with the Proxima medical data. As the colony's chief scientist, his testimony carries significant weight." The Stellar Horizon docked smoothly at one of the human berths in the Earth Embassy section. Mark gathered his personal effects and followed Admiral Thornton through the airlock. The station's artificial gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth standard, a compromise between the various species' homeworld conditions. "We've arranged quarters for you in the east section," Thornton explained as they walked through wide corridors. "The Iridian wing is adjacent to ours. Ambassador Zoe requested you visit when you're settled." "How's Kyril doing?" Mark asked. A slight smile crossed Thornton's face. "See for yourself. She's been asking about you daily." After depositing his belongings in his Dr. Ned quarters, Mark made his way to the Iridian wing. The architecture shifted, subtriangles grew more organic, lighting adjusted to the purple-tinted spectrum preferred by Iridian eyes. Ambassador Zoe greeted him at the diplomatic reception area. "Dr. Ramos, welcome to Arcturus Station." "Ambassador, it's good to see you again." "Someone else has been quite eager for your arrival," Zoe said, gesturing toward a side corridor. Kyril appeared around the corner, her frail body now vibrant with health. She ran toward Mark with a fluid grace that would have been impossible during her illness. "Guardian," she called out, using the title she'd given him during their first days together. Mark knelt to receive her enthusiastic embrace. "Look at you. The recovery is remarkable. The enzymes healed everything," she said, stepping back to spin in a small circle. "Trevik says my cellular structure shows no lasting damage." "She has become something of a celebrity among our people," Zoe added. "The first successful case of cross-species medical intervention has made her quite popular." Kyril tugged at Mark's sleeve. "I have something to show you. I've been learning about human biology." She pulled out a small holographic projector displaying impressively accurate models of human cellular structures. "She's been studying medical science since her recovery," Zoe explained. Your influence, I suspect. After catching up with Kyle, Mark made his way to the station's central atrium, a vast open space where representatives from all 7 conquered species mingled. The diversity was staggering. The crystalline fauteury glided on hovering platforms, their translucent bodies refracting the station's lights. Insectoid Vrex moved in small groups, their compound eyes constantly scanning. The aquatic Melosians wore specialized hydration suits outside their water-filled embassy section. Silicon-based Krell stood nearly 3 meters tall, their rocky ski doctor-overed in glowing patterns. Mammalian Erdri resembled anthropomorphic bears with intricate mechanical augmentations. The plant-like Florans swayed gently even while stationary, their leaf-like appendages constantly adjusting to the environmental conditions. Dr. Henrik Voss found Mark near a refreshment area. Dr. Ramos, at last. The older scientist clasped his arm in greeting. I was beginning to think you'd missed the preliminary meetings. The Proxima follow-up work took longer than expected, Mark explained. How are our patients doing? Colonel Steele sends his regards. He's resumed duties, though on a limited schedule. Voss lowered his voice. Your presence tomorrow is crucial. 3 species openly oppose humanity's admission to the conquered. Which ones? The Vrex, Krell, and Florans. They've cited our history of warfare, environmental destruction, and colonial resource exploitation. Voss's expression darkened. The Vrex ambassador has been particularly vocal about humans lacking sufficient empathy toward non-humanly doctor forms. That's why I structured my presentation around the enzyme treatment, Mark said. It directly contradicts that narrative. Later that evening, Mark retired to his quarters to review his presentation materials one final time. A chime at his door interrupted his work. Dr. Ramos, a tall woman in security uniform, stood in the corridor. Security Officer Dalen Reed, Embassy Protection Detail. May I speak with you privately? Mark admitted her, noting the former military bearing in her posture. Once inside, Reed activated a small device that emitted a soft hum. Anti-surveillance, she explained briefly. Admiral Thornton instructed me to brief you on a developing situation. What kind of situation? Reed's expression remained professionally neutral. We've detected unauthorized access to the restricted archives where humanity's application data is stored. Someone accessed confidential medical records from the Proxima Centauri incident. How serious is the breach? Analysis suggests the intrusion originated from Vrex systems. Reed's eyes narrowed slightly. We believe they may be attempting to sabotage Earth's application. Mark set down his tablet. What specifically did they access? Patient records primarily, with focus on treatment outcomes. Reed paused. Admiral Thornton has authorized a counter-investigation, but he wants you to focus on your presentation. I'll handle the security breach. Understood, Mark said, though concern lingered. Please keep me informed of any developments that might affect my presentation. Of course, Doctor. Reed moved toward the door, then paused. The Admiral believes your work at Proxima may be our strongest argument for inclusion in the conquered. Don't let this distraction compromise that. After Reed departed, Mark returned to his preparation with renewed focus. The Vrex opposition suggested they might have identified something in the medical data to use against humanity's application. He needed to be prepared for any challenge they might present. Sleep came fitfully that night, his mind churning with possibilities. When morning arrived, Mark dressed in his formal medical uniform and made his way to the Conquered's great chamber where the hearings would take place. Admiral Thornton intercepted him outside the chamber entrance. We're scheduled third in today's agenda. The Vrex delegation requested to speak immediately before us. That's not coincidental. Do we know what they're planning? Officer Reed's investigation is ongoing. Thornton straightened Mark's collar with an almost paternal gesture. Remember, we represent all of humanity today. Whatever happens in there, maintain composure. The great chamber stretched in a perfect circle, with 7 elevated sections for each member species. The human delegation took their designated position in the presentation area, facing the assembled representatives. Mark noted the Iridian High Council, led by Councillor Vetrix, nodding in acknowledgement as they entered. The Melosian chairperson began the proceedings with a series of harmonic tones that the translators rendered as a formal welcome. The Vrex delegation moved to the presentation floor, Hive Commander Zyk's compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights in fractured patterns. Mark listened carefully as the Vrex ambassador methodically outlined concerns about human inclusion, building what seemed a carefully structured case against Earth's application. He couldn't help but notice the ambassador's mandibles clicking in what appeared to be anticipation as his presentation concluded. As Mark stepped forward to present humanity's case, he felt the weight of 7 civilizations' scrutiny upon him. The fate of Earth's relationship with the galactic community rested, at least partly, on what happened next. As he began, Mark firmly set aside his concerns about the Vrex's motives. He activated the holographic display, projecting detailed medical data for all representatives to see. "Distinguished representatives of the galactic conquered," he began. "I am Dr. Mark Ramos, Chief Medical Officer of Proxima Centauri Colony. What you see before you represents the culmination of something unprecedented, a successful cross-species medical intervention that saved not one, but dozens of lives across both human and Iridian physiology." The chamber remained silent as Mark methodically presented the enzyme treatment's development, from initial crisis to breakthrough. He emphasized the collaborative nature of human innovation, combined with Iridian biological expertise. "The radiation poisoning affected our neural systems differently," Mark explained, highlighting comparative scans, but the underlying mechanism was similar enough that we could develop a unified treatment approach. As Mark reached the section about treatment outcomes, Commander Zykst rose from the Vrex delegation. "I request clarification," the insectoid representative's translator rendered in precise, emotionless tones. "Your data suggests complete neural recovery in all patients, yet our analysis indicates 3 human minors still experience intermittent seizures. Is this not evidence of treatment failure?" Mark maintained his composure despite the unexpected challenge. The Vrex had indeed found their angle of attack. "Commander Zykst raises an important point," Mark acknowledged. 3 patients do experience occasional neurological anomalies, not because the treatment failed, but because their exposure exceeded critical thresholds before intervention. Even with these complications, all 3 have returned to functional lives, when without treatment, death was certain. Trevix, present with the Iridian delegation, stood to support Mark's explanation. "The Iridian High Council has reviewed all medical data. We confirm that outcomes exceeded all projected survival rates, particularly considering the unprecedented nature of the intervention." The hearing continued for nearly 3 hours as representatives questioned various aspects of the Proxima incident. Through it all, Mark detected the gradual shift in the chamber's atmosphere from skepticism to cautious interest. When the final questions concluded, the Melosian chairperson called for a preliminary assessment vote. Mark stood with Admiral Thornton as each delegation registered their position. The Iridians, Fauchery, Melosians, and City voted in favor of continuing humanity's application process. The Krell abstained, which Thornton whispered was better than expected. Only the Vrex and Florins opposed. "A favorable preliminary assessment," the chairperson announced. "The formal vote will be conducted in 6 months, allowing time for additional evidence submission and review." As they exited the chamber, Mark found Kyle waiting with Ambassador Zoe. The young Iridian rushed forward, clasping his hand. "Did it work? Will humans join the conquered?" she asked eagerly. "We've cleared the first hurdle," Mark told her, smiling at her enthusiasm. The real decision comes later. Ambassador Zoe nodded, but today's outcome is promising. Your presentation effectively countered the Vrek's objections. Admiral Thornton joined them, his usually stern expression softened slightly. Well handled in there, Doctor, particularly the question about the ongoing seizures. They were looking for any weakness, Mark said. Indeed. Thornton checked his communication device. The Eternal Dawn reports enzyme production is exceeding targets. If the Conquered approves our application, we'll be ready for full-scale medical exchange immediately. Officer Reed appeared at Thornton's side, speaking in a low voice. Admiral, we've identified the source of the security breach. It wasn't the Vrek's directly received the data from another source. Who? Thornton asked sharply. Still confirming, sir. Request permission to continue investigation using station resources. Granted, keep me informed. Mark escorted Kyle through the station's central atrium, answering her endless questions about Earth and human culture. Her recovery had been remarkable. Not a trace remained of the frail, radiation-poisoned child he'd first treated. Guardian, she said, using her special name for him, will I visit Earth when humans join the Conquered? I hope so, Mark replied. There's much I'd like to show you. Trevix says I have an aptitude for xenobiology, she said proudly. I've been studying human cellular structures. Is that so? Mark smiled. Perhaps you'll become a doctor someday. Kyle nodded solemnly. Like you, to help people from all worlds. 6 months passed with dizzying speed. The enzyme production facilities aboard the Eternal Dawn operated at full capacity, producing stockpiles of the treatment for both human and Iridian use. Mark divided his time between Arcturus Station and Proxima Centauri, where Professor Voss continued refining the treatment protocol. Colonel Steele made a complete recovery, though he remained changed by the experience. His previous opposition to Iridian contact had transformed into cautious advocacy for interspecies cooperation, particularly in medical matters. On the day of the formal vote, Mark stood once again in the Great Chamber, this time joined by all key participants from the Proxima Incident: Colonel Steele, Jake, Trevix, Professor Voss, and most importantly, Kyle herself. The chamber hushed as the Melosian chairperson called the session to order. Each delegation presented final position statements. The Vreks, while still expressing reservations about human history, had moderated their opposition after extensive review of the Proxima medical data. When the final vote was tallied, 6 delegations supported Earth's admission, with only the Florans opposing. Humanity would become the 8th member of the Galactic Conquered. Admiral Thornton gripped Mark's shoulder. You did it, Doctor. We all did, Mark corrected, watching as Kyle bounced excitedly beside Ambassador Zoe. The next 6 months passed in a blur of diplomatic arrangements, technological exchanges, and preparation for humanity's formal induction. The Earth Diplomatic Corps established a permanent embassy on Arcturus Station, with Mark appointed as medical liaison. And then, finally, the day arrived. Mark stood on the observation deck of Earth's new conquered embassy, watching ships from all member worlds move in stately patterns around Arcturus Station. The formal induction ceremony would begin in 2 hours, culminating a journey that had started with saving one Iridian child. He adjusted the lunar silver bracelet on his wrist, the symbol of his status as Verdeth, to Kyle. The bracelet now bore smaller tokens from each of the 12 Proxima Centauri patients, whose neural complications he had successfully treated with the joint human-Iridian medical team. Nervous about your speech, Guardian? Kyle asked, approaching him in her formal diplomatic attire. Now 7 years old, she carried herself with remarkable poise for her age. Her iridescent blue skin had fully regained its vibrant hue, showing no lingering effects from her near-fatal radiation poisoning. Speeches aren't exactly covered in medical training, Mark admitted, smiling at his young charge. Ambassador Zoe joined them, accompanied by Admiral Thornton and the newly appointed Earth-Conquered representative, Diana Gray, formerly governor of Proxima Centauri Colony. "The chamber is nearly prepared," Representative Gray informed them. "We should review the final sequence once more." "Of course," Mark agreed, turning from the viewport. Security Officer Reed interrupted, her expression tense. "Ambassador, Admiral, we have an urgent situation. A vessel has dropped out of FTL near the station, broadcasting emergency medical distress signals on all frequencies." "Identity?" Thornton asked sharply. "Krell mining vessel Obsidian Carver," Reed reported. "They're reporting multiple casualties from a catastrophic coolant system failure." Mark's medical instincts immediately engaged. "How many injured?" 23 confirmed casualties, Reed said. "But there's a complication. The Krell have specifically requested no human involvement in the emergency response." Ambassador Zoe frowned. "Why would they refuse assistance?" "Historical distrust," Representative Gray explained. "The Krell remain skeptical of non-silicon-based life forms handling their injuries, despite voting for our admission." Mark accessed the data on his tablet. "Let me see the chemical composition of the coolant." As the information appeared, Mark's pulse quickened. "These properties are remarkably similar to the isotope that affected our workers at Proxima. The treatment protocol we developed could be adapted for the Krell victims." Ambassador Zoe immediately recognized the opportunity. "We could offer the services of the Eternal Dawn." "It's still docked here." Admiral Thornton nodded. "I'll contact the Krell ambassador." "Already tried," Reed interjected. "Ambassador Grath Vor refuses any human assistance, citing their species' physiological vulnerability to chemical interactions that would be harmless to carbon-based life." Mark studied the Krell medical data more closely. "The problem isn't just cultural, it's physiological. The silicon-based Krell biology would reject our standard delivery system. The nanites we used previously would be identified as foreign bodies." Professor Voss, who had joined them unnoticed, peered over Mark's shoulder. "He's right. We need a completely different enzyme delivery approach." Mark's mind raced through possibilities, recalling his discussions with various conquered medical specialists. Suddenly, a solution crystallized. "The Vrex bioorganic interface technology," he said. "Hive Director Talax shared the basics during our collaboration at Proxima. We could adapt it to create a temporary silicon-compatible delivery system that would work within Krell physiological parameters without rejection." Admiral Thornton looked skeptical. "That would require immediate approval from both Vrex and Krell representatives." "We don't have time for the full diplomatic process," Mark insisted. "Those miners have hours at most before permanent neural damage occurs." He activated his communication device. "I'm contacting Talax directly. We established a private channel during our previous work." As Mark connected with the Vrex medical director, Ambassador Zoe turned to Admiral Thornton. "I'll speak with High Counselor Vetrix. The Iridian Confederation might be able to invoke a formal guarantee protocol." Mark's conversation with Talax was brief but productive. The Vrex, impressed by the human doctor's insight, immediately dispatched a medical shuttle to rendezvous with the damaged Krell vessel. Ambassador Grath Vor remained opposed to human involvement until High Counselor Vetrix made a formal diplomatic guarantee, invoking a rarely used conquered protocol that allowed one member species to take responsibility for another's actions. Under this provision, Vetrix explained to the gathered representatives, any negative outcome would be considered a direct offense against the Iridian Confederation rather than merely a human error. The stakes were enormous. Entire Iridian-human alliance now rested on Mark's treatment plan. With this unprecedented guarantee, the Krell leadership reluctantly agreed to the procedure. Rather than delaying Earth's induction ceremony, the conquered High Council incorporated the emergency response into the formal proceedings, creating a live broadcast demonstration of interspecies cooperation. Mark rushed to the Arcturus Medical Center, where Trevix and the newly arrived Talax awaited. Together, they established a holographic interface with the emergency medical team aboard the Krell vessel. The silicon-based tissue requires completely different handling protocols, Mark explained as they prepared the treatment. Temperature control is critical. A 5-degree variation could crystallize their neural pathways. The adapted Vrex interface successfully bonded with the first Krell patient, allowing controlled delivery of the modified enzymes. For 17/10 minutes, same duration Mark had waited during Chiral's original treatment. They monitored the patient's response. Neural activity stabilizing, reported the Krell medical officer, surprise evident even through the translator. Crystallization process halted. One by one, the emergency team worked through the remaining victims. All 23 survived, though 3 sustained permanent damage to their crystalline neural structures that would require long-term rehabilitation. As the emergency response concluded successfully, Mark returned to the embassy just in time for the formal induction ceremony in Arcturus Station's Grand Concourse. The timing created a powerful symbolic moment. Humanity's first official act as a conquered member was saving lives across species boundaries. During Earth's formal induction speech, Representative Gray announced the establishment of the Interspecies Medical Exchange Program. Mark listened with growing amazement as she named him the program's first director, with Trevix and Talax serving as co-directors representing their respective species. The ceremony concluded with Ambassador Grathvor approaching Mark, the usually reserved Krell diplomat moving with deliberate purpose. In his crystalline hands, he carried a small silicon formation that glowed with an internal light. "This is a Krell life crystal," Grathvor's translator conveyed. "It contains the mineral essence of those you saved today. Such tokens are shared only among Krell clan members." He placed the crystal in Mark's hands. "Today, Dr. Ramos, you have proven that humanity belongs among the stars. Your species has much to teach us, perhaps more than we anticipated." Mark held the life crystal carefully, feeling its subtle warmth against his palm. From saving one Iridian child to helping establish humanity's place in the galactic communitized journey had been extraordinary. And from the look in Chiral's bright eyes as she watched the proceedings, he knew this was just the beginning.